Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Cook Inlet Tug and Barge is a marine transportation company specializing in harbor services with a primary marketing focus on the Port of Anchorage, providing their customers with quality-based service specifically tailored to their needs.
The National Weather Service.
And good Thursday, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. Thank you for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather. Remember, you can always get a lot of this information, if not all of it, online anytime by going to weather.gov/Alaska or arh.noaa.gov. The weather info line is open at 800-472-0391. You'll find a lot of this information during the day on Twitter, on Facebook under NWS Alaska, and on YouTube. If you go to NWS Anchorage or NWS Fairbanks, you'll find the afternoon daily map briefing there. It comes out around 4 o'clock each day if you want a sneak peek at what we're going to talk about here during Alaska Weather. Or following this broadcast, if you go to YouTube and type in AKwx TV, you'll find the complete show from our broadcast partner here at Alaska Public. You can go to alaskapublic.org as well. Here's a look at what's going on perhaps in your village and community tonight. Around the middle Tanana Valley, if flood warnings continue, that'll go until around mid-evening, 8:45 or so. The Chena River around the Moose Creek Dam area is still seeing high water. That's expected to ease and subside as we go into the evening and overnight hours, so improvements expected there fairly soon, but a flood warning continues at this point there. And also across the Beaufort Seacoast, high surf advisories are in effect. Those are expected to drop off around 6 o'clock tonight, but unusually high seas there, about 2 feet above normal expected because of that, with the seas around 7 to 9 feet in some areas there. So again, rough conditions thanks to those north and westerly winds that are up around 35 knots or so across the coastal areas near the Beaufort. Here's a look out to the west now, and across the Bering Sea and the North Pacific you can see several disturbances. One of those south of the Aleutian chain. This will be working its way northward in the next couple days, producing some mid to high end gales probably across the central and western chain. We expect gale warnings there by Friday and Friday night, so watch for some changes there in the western and central chain. Eventually this storm is expected to track a little bit further eastward with time, but the immediate focus will be across the central and western part of the chain. In the meantime, we've got another area of low pressure out across eastern Asia and well south and west of the Kamchatka Peninsula. That is several days away, if not more than a week away. The upper level weather pattern, though, is showing signs of some activity coming our way in the next couple of weeks, so we'll be watching for some changes there. Out across the rest of Alaska, you see southeast is just kind of flirting with the main moisture stream, getting a little bit of rainfall in there, but by and large most of it is still west of your area. This will be moving eastward as we head into the weekend. Across southern Alaska, a broad area of very white cloud cover in the infrared satellite picture that we're looking at here. That is the rain that's been moving northward all day long. A frontal boundary also lifting northward. In the meantime, a lot of dry air across the interior and a good part of the Yukon Valley. Northward, the clouds return once you get north of the Brooks Range, and a cold front swept through across the Beaufort Seacoast. It's still exiting the region slowly this afternoon and this evening. As it does so, it's going to leave behind colder air and eventually a little bit more dry air across the interior of Alaska. As another frontal boundary is working northward, it should stop across the Alaska Range. Out across the west, low clouds and stratus continue for a good chunk of the Bering Sea. Really nothing too out of the ordinary there right now with high pressure in command. Across the southern Bering Sea, it's keeping light winds and generally low clouds and occasionally poor visibility out across some of the west and west central part of the ocean. And high pressure across the southern part of the Gulf of Alaska out across the Pacific Northwest, helping to channel that moisture further and further north. Here's a look at the surface image then. As we check on the frontal positions, you can see the frontal boundary working across the Beaufort Seacoast. It's going to generally stay to the north and east of the Brooks Range. It's the north and westerly flow a little bit stronger across the Beaufort Sea, and with that came snow showers and more snow a little bit further east into Canada. High pressure behind that across the Chukchi Sea at 1,021 millibars. Trying to settle things down a little bit, dropping a little bit of light rainfall across Point Hope, Point Lay. Dry conditions across a good chunk of the Seward Peninsula. It looked like there were some low clouds hanging around the interior of the Seward Peninsula today. Norton Sound also looking at a little more sunshine. Again, quite a bit of dry air across the interior of Alaska. And here's our front that's parked across the Alaska Range. And here's the next wave of moisture working northward. As that continues trekking northward, the rainfall will continue through a good chunk of the Kenai Peninsula, the Anchorage Bowl, the Matanuska and Susitna valleys as that warmer air is lifting northward. Again, it hadn't really reached into southeastern Alaska just yet. It looked like there might have been a few showers here and there, but nothing too substantial as high pressure was pretty much still in command there. You can see that ridge poking up there as those lines of constant pressure kind of poke toward the low pressure system. High pressure across the southern Bering at 1,018 millibars is holding back the next wave of colder air, with low pressure a little bit weaker than that out across the Gulf of Anadyr and southward. As we go into tonight, the main focus for active weather will be across the southern areas and across the north. As the wave of low pressure and the cold air continues to trek eastward, the remnants of that will still create some snow showers, it looks like, across the Brooks Range and north, but the blizzard warnings have been dropped at this point. The frontal boundary working into Prince William Sound and the eastern side of the Kenai Peninsula will make the triple point. This area here between the occlusion, the warm air, and the cold air usually represents an awful lot of potential for some heavier rainfall. So along that boundary and into the Wrangell-St. Elias it goes. And with that, we expect some heavier rainfall across the north and northeastern sections of the Gulf, eventually working its way into northern parts of southeastern Alaska. So plan for some rain there tonight. Low pressure will be just inside of Bristol Bay at 1,006 millibars, and that is right now the guiding force of this surface system. As this continues working northward, the progression of the rainfall should really stop around the Alaska Range. Points north of that may see some clouds, but after that looks like pretty much clear and dry conditions for a good many people across the middle and upper Yukon and into Kotzebue Sound. Out across the south and west part of the map there at 982 millibars is the next Pacific storm that's again working its way northward. And high pressure is sitting right here across the southern Bering, and it's really not quite enough to make it on the map, but it's holding the storm back. It is going to allow it to intensify just a little bit more as we head into the overnight hours. By Friday, a 976 millibar low will still be well south of the Aleutians, but the winds will be strong enough on the northern edge of this that gales will be likely across a good chunk of the central and western chain. That's about as far north as it seems to reach at this point, and then it will continue working its way eastward. By Friday afternoon across the Copper River Basin, the next wave of that low pressure system will work its way into the Alaska Range and just north. Out across southeast, periods of moderate to occasionally heavy rain are likely, and again that's going to drop visibilities not just for southeast but all the way along the Alaska Range. If you've got flying plans tomorrow and it takes you through any of the passes, you should plan on poor visibility and probably some lower ceilings because of the rain and because of the increased moisture across the southern ranges there, especially on the south and kind of inlet sides there as you were. Out across the west and north into Bethel, you should see a quick improvement of visibility, it looks like, heading northward into Norton Sound and then north of the Yukon Valley. Things look to be sunny, if not mostly clear through a good part of the day, with high pressure just east of Point Barrow at 1,025 millibars. Snow showers should be limited to northern Canada. And we're also looking at some rain opportunities there around St. Lawrence Island. South of that, it's mainly just fog. So the main focus really is going to be in the southern parts of Alaska as we go into tomorrow. And then for Saturday, low pressure is still working and reorganizing itself across the northern Gulf. We're still looking for moderate to occasionally heavy rain across some parts of the north and eastern coast. That could include some parts of northern southeast. The farther south you go, the less intense the rain should get. That it could include areas around Petersburg, southward to Metlakatla, Ketchikan, Klawock. Frontal boundary is still parked along the Alaska Range, so just north of that there's still rain, but it really should diminish fairly quickly as you run into a big slug of dry air all the way now across the coastal plain where partly cloudy conditions are expected there on Saturday to mostly sunny if not completely clear conditions, save for a little bit of fog around Kotzebue Sound and across some parts of the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta. It looks like a pretty bright day for Saturday. Low pressure though out across the North Pacific, still going strong. It's filling in just a little bit. Now up to 978 millibars, and you can see that front now has made its way into the southern Bering Sea. The tight packing of the isobars there, the lines of constant atmospheric pressure tell us there's probably a good chance there's going to be a lot of wind with this. And again, we're still talking about mid to high-end gales with this across the central and western chain. We'll watch and see how far east that spreads because we still have high pressure sitting here just off the coast of the Seward Peninsula, and that's going to try and limit how far east and north this low pressure storm goes out of the North Pacific there. So we'll wait and see what happens on Sunday. But right now, that's the latest as we start up the weekend. For southeast, upper 50s and lower 60s across a good chunk of southeast today. 54 in Sitka and down around Ketchikan, and Annette temperatures again were a little bit cooler thanks to the cloud cover. 61 around Juneau, 58 around Haines and Skagway around the Copper River Basin. A little bit cooler around Glen Allen today. Hunters probably know that well at 49 degrees. Prince William Sound also saw cooler weather in low to mid 50s with more rain headed your way. 47 in Anchorage, 48 in Kenai, and earlier this afternoon it was 60 in Homer, but considerably cooler around Seward at 54, 63 in Kodiak. And if you look at the temperatures here, you can pretty much figure out where those frontal boundaries were, where the warm air was, and where it hadn't quite reached just yet. So chances are Homer was on the south side of that frontal boundary working its way northward with warmer air. Up around Talkeetna is 50 degrees this afternoon, lower 50s for Fairbanks in the middle Tanana Valley. Looked like Fort Greely was 51, Healy showing 53, 49 around Tanana, 53 in Eagle. A little bit milder still around Northway. Looking northward at Fort Yukon is 50 degrees, and then once you get into the Brooks Range, temperatures dropped, cold enough for snow in some cases again, upper 30s all the way through Anaktuvuk Pass, and you get into 30-degree weather. 34 around Prudhoe Bay and Deadhorse, 33 in Barrow, 39 in Wainwright, 40s for Kotzebue Sound today. Kivalina showing 48, Shishmaref about the same, 51 in Nome, and we saw similar conditions there around Norton Sound coastline into Unalakleet. Hooper Bay in the mid-50s. Savunga was only 46 this afternoon, 53 in Bethel, lower 50s for McGrath as well, Grayling in the upper 40s. Bristol Bay temperatures generally in the lower 50s today as you get down to Pilot Point, Port Hayden, all the way down to Sandpoint, Cold Bay and False Pass. It was generally in the 50s. Sandpoint was 61 though. Mid-50s for the Pribilofs, 54 around Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. Adak and Atka both in the mid-50s, and Shemya had 54 degrees. Now, overnight temperatures won't change a whole lot for the chain and the Pribilofs, of course. Still looking for upper 40s to about 50 degrees. Southwestern temperatures, though, you're going to see a big difference once you get north of the Yukon. Upper 40s and lower 50s for Bristol Bay. Once you get up toward Bethel and north, boy, temperatures drop into the 30s and fast. 20s there for the Yukon Valley, all the way into Fort Yukon at 25. It looks like Fairbanks at 31. Remember, that clear sky tonight means you're going to lose any heat that you've gained today quickly into the upper atmosphere, and temps are going to get cold into the teens for Anaktuvuk Pass and Arctic Village. South Central, upper 40s and lower 50s all the way down the Cook Inlet toward Kodiak. Lower 50s for a good part of southeast, including Juneau at 54. Nome 32. Barrow looking at 29. Kaktovik could be as cold as 26 with a high of 37 tomorrow. About the same there in Barrow. Nome's looking at 53. Southwestern Alaska in the upper 50s to about 60 degrees. Upper 50s to, I'll say 62 for Sandpoint all the way out toward False Pass and Cold Bay. Kodiak 60 degrees on the nose. About the same there in Homer. Prince William Sound temperatures probably back in the mid 50s. Watch for more rain tomorrow as well. Upper 50s and lower 60s for southeast. And Adak, Atka, and the Pribilofs all in the mid-50s once again. Here's a check for flying weather now. IFR conditions like I was talking about for the Alaska Range, good part of Prince William Sound, and even northern sections of southeast. It's going to be a little tricky flying around the southern parts of Alaska tomorrow. And MVFR conditions for a good chunk of the Arctic coastline. St. Matthew Island waters, the northern tip of the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta into parts of Norton Sound, and IFR conditions just south of the chain. Here we go. Your past conditions. Anaktuvuk looks like it should improve tomorrow to VFR. Same goes for Adigan Pass. Watch for a lot of white on the ground. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, we expect IFR all the way around the Horn to Rainy Pass, Windy Pass, Isabel Pass expected to be instrument flight rule. Mentasta Pass heading that way during the daytime tomorrow. Tanita Pass probably going for IFR conditions, and Portage Pass may start out at MVFR. We expect the eastern side to turn back over to IFR conditions during the day, and maybe some improvement on the western side. Chilkoot and White Pass with rain moving in, IFR conditions should be expected there during a good part of the day. Now, freezing levels with a cold air dropping southward. No wonder this white line that represents our surface freezing line at 32 degrees is dropping southward as well. You can see that all the way into the Seward Peninsula, still mainly north and along the Yukon Valley, and then it snakes a little bit further north of Fort Yukon, but it is certainly showing signs of fall there. The elevated freezing lines aloft anywhere from 4 to about 8,000 feet until you get just south of the Alaska Range summits and the Anchorage Bowl, the Matanuska-Susitna Valleys. South and along the Pacific coastline, you're at about 10,000 feet, and right through the Dixon entrance, that's 12,000 feet there. So cold air certainly making you run southward. Icing potential, anywhere above 10,000 feet is where we're seeing some of the reports today. Light to isolated moderate, mostly likely they're out of the Copper River Basin, north of the Alaska Range and the Wrangell St. Elias, and into the Haines and Skagway area, again above 10,000 feet. Above 6,000 feet for the Arctic coastline. St. Lawrence Island, probably above 5, and way out west across the areas around Kiska, probably above 14,000 feet for some light to isolated moderate there as well. The jet stream has a trough of low pressure dropping southward across the western part of Alaska. High pressure still in control off of the Pacific Northwest. That's going to keep a lot of that moisture focused into southeastern Alaska. We also have a trough digging into the North Pacific. That's what's supporting that really large surface storm there south of the Aleutians at this point. At 9,000 feet, you can see our trough crossing through central and western Alaska. North and northwesterly winds coming in through the YK around 10 to 15 knots. A broad southwesterly flow crossing the Gulf. And that's all being supported by high pressure, again, just off the coast of the Pacific Northwest. Wind speeds crossing the Gulf around 15 to 30 knots. That's sustained into the northern parts of southeast. Wind speeds across the interior are generally light, 10 to 15 knots there. We have a really strong surge of wind, though, well northeast of AKwx. That's around 50 knots. So if you're going to run into some really fast wind, that's probably where you're going to find it. We're also starting to see winds build across the North Pacific, wrapping around low pressure there again at the surface. That's what we're watching for gales later on in the week. At 3,000 feet, high pressure is a little bit northward from its other position we just saw on the map. More of a southerly flow across the Gulf. We have low pressure here wrapping in across the western Alaska range, 15 to maybe 20 knots or so. Otherwise, winds are pretty light across the interior and across the Arctic coast from the west, around 10 knots in this case. High pressure is driving in winds out of the Bering Sea, around 5 to 10 knots or so. And then we see a big uptick in the wind speed crossing through the central and western chains. Some of those speeds as high as 50 to 55 knots. So pretty big change there out across the west and the North Pacific at 3,000 feet. Turbulence then, we expect at least some isolated light turbulence across the frontal boundary there into the northern Gulf. Watch for some faster winds across the northern Gulf feeding into the Prince William Sound region and around the Barren Islands and northeastern side of Kodiak Island. Across the Alaska range below 6,000 feet. Watch for some chop there, especially if you are attempting to fly over the mountains and over the passes. Across the Arctic Ocean, a little bit of a light chop there, and then we're going to focus on some increased turbulence threats south of the chain below 6,000 feet. Some of that could be occasional moderate if you're flying south of Adak, Atka, and Kiska. That's a look at your aviation forecast. We'll be back in just a few minutes with an update on the sea ice edge and, of course, your marine weather. Stay tuned.
Flying along the Milky Way. Hey there, stargazers. I'm James Albury, director of the Kika Silva Pla Planetarium in Gainesville, Florida.
And I'm Dean Regas, astronomer for the Cincinnati Observatory. This week, we'll be your guides to the galaxy.
Yep, we're going to show you the Milky Way, something I hardly ever get to see in Florida. How many times have you seen the Milky Way, Dean?
The only Milky Way I see in Cincinnati is filled with chocolate and nougat. For me, light pollution is a big problem. City lights illuminate signs, parking lots, buildings,
and also the night sky. The more light that we shine up, the less light the stars shine down.
Even though it's invisible from cities, James and I can share a sneaky tip to find the Milky Way in your sky. Let's show you.
Okay, let's pretend it's 10 o'clock at night and we're far from city lights.
Man, it's dark out here.
I know, and look at all the summer stars you can see.
So many stars that you can't even count them all.
You can also see a band of faint light stretching from the northeast, up overhead, and down to the southwest. This is the Milky Way. When you look at the Milky Way, you're observing billions and billions of stars. Most of the stars in our galaxy are stretched out in a band all around us.
With us in the middle. There are so many stars in our line of sight that they appear as milky clouds. Most ancient cultures were just as fascinated with the Milky Way as they were with any planet or constellation. You can definitely see why. Out in the country, it dominates the sky. Some bright and famous constellations can be found along this galactic river, such as Cassiopeia the Queen, Cygnus the Swan, and Scorpius the Scorpion.
Cassiopeia is one of the most recognizable constellations. In the summer evenings, she sits on her throne in the northeastern sky.
What? You mean those stars that look like the letter W, that's a queen?
Use your imagination, Dean.
Well, that picture certainly helps, but I guess I'm imagination challenged.
In that case, picture this. W shape of stars as Cassiopeia's crown sparkling with 5 stellar jewels.
Okay, now that I can see. Now kick back and look high in the sky. Almost straight overhead, you'll see 3 very bright stars marking the Summer Triangle. The Summer Triangle is not an official constellation. It's really 3 constellations: Lyra the Harp, Cygnus the Swan, and Aquila the Eagle.
Let's focus on Cygnus since it's probably the easiest to identify because of its cross-like shape. In fact, it's also called the Northern Cross.
Cygnus's brightest star is Deneb, which marks the tail of the swan. Cygnus is located in an extremely rich part of the Milky Way, so imagine it flying along the great river in the sky.
Near Deneb, the Milky Way branches into 2 channels, leaving a dark region in the middle. This is called the Cygnus Rift or the Northern Coal Sack. Now face south. Here the Milky Way threads between 2 zodiacal constellations, Scorpius and Sagittarius. Scorpius the Scorpion is easy to spot with its bright red star for a heart and its curved tail and stinger stars. The stars in Sagittarius resemble more of a teapot than a centaur wielding a bow and arrow.
When you look between Scorpius and Sagittarius, you're peering into the center of our galaxy. In that direction are billions and billions of stars. And at the very center of those is a supermassive black hole. X-ray satellites have captured amazing activity around this region called Sagittarius A. Of course, you can't see the Milky Way if you're a city-bound stargazer. Let's show you the difference between a rural sky and a light-polluted sky.
Yikes, what a difference. Even though the Milky Way has disappeared, we still have 3 constellations clearly visible to guide us: Cassiopeia in the northeast, Cygnus high overhead, and Scorpius low in the south.
And that's where the Milky Way is, even if you can't see it. Once you identify Cassiopeia, Cygnus, or Scorpius, scan these regions of the sky with binoculars. With just a little magnification, a wealth of stars will be revealed to you.
So start counting those billions and billions of stars tonight as you keep looking up.
Oh, my director's telling me that the Milky Way is actually in slot D5 in the vending machine, and not exactly what they said there. So yeah, if you can't find it, try the vending machine. The sea ice edge is about 100, maybe 115 nautical miles, generally north and east of Kaktovik and north of Barrow there. Other than that, nothing close to home at this point. The sea ice edge is always available online at weather.gov/anchorage/ice.php. You can check the outlook here. We have about roughly 2 weeks or so, probably until we get to that sea ice minimum, when all new ice that's been out there instantly becomes old ice and passes that seasonal point there that we kind of celebrate a little ice birthday there. So everything out there right now well north of the Arctic coastline. Again, this brought to you by our sea ice team for Alaska. Now, the southeast forecast across the inner waterways looks to be holding to what we were talking about yesterday, more of a southerly flow that really picks up as you get into the Lynn Canal. 15 knots around the Clarence Strait from more of a southeasterly direction, 3-foot seas there. And then once you get into the north and south Lynn Canal, it comes up to about 25 to 30 knots from the south with a 5-foot sea. Coastal areas looking at an onshore flow from the south and west supporting the rainfall there, and a little bit higher seas the further north you go. 8-foot seas around the Dixon entrance to 11-foot seas just outside of Yakutat, otherwise 20 to 25 knots. By Saturday, we get more of a little southerly shift there from Craig to Sitka to Gustavus, more of a southeasterly flow outside of Yakutat. 11-foot seas continue there, 8-foot seas continue outside of the Dixon entrance, and we keep our south and southeasterly flow coming up through the inner waterways, about 10 knots in the south to as high as 25 knots in the north and south Lynn Canal, with 4-foot seas there the farther north you go. Across the north and western Gulf, inside of Prince William Sound, a northeasterly flow, 15 knots with a 3-foot sea, 7, 8, and 9-foot seas there across the north and western Gulf. You get into the Barren Islands, we're still looking at northeasterlies there, 15 to 25 knots and 15 to 20 knots in the Cook Inlet, with 4 to as high as 8-foot seas south of Kenai. A light and variable flow inside of Shelikof Strait. Southerlies on the eastern side of Kodiak Island at 15 knots. By Saturday, we're looking at more of a north and westerly flow sweeping into the Gulf and coming in behind low pressure. The winds will be a little more variable inside and outside of Prince William Sound, 10 to 15 knots there, 8-foot seas once you pass Middleton Island and head into the Gulf. Westerlies coming off the Barrens at 15 knots and outside of Resurrection Bay. North and westerly winds inside of the Cook Inlet with more of a light and variable flow in the northern end, and westerlies off of Kodiak Island at 15 knots with a 6-foot sea. Across the Alaska Peninsula, northerly wind inside of Bristol Bay, northwesterlies crossing the southern tip of the peninsula at 15 to 20 knots, 5-foot seas on the Bering side, 7-foot seas on the south side. As you get into Saturday, light northwesterlies inside of Bristol Bay, more of a variable flow running down the coast. On the Pacific side, a northerly flow south of Sandpoint and King Cove at 15 knots with 6-foot seas there running into Castle Cape and east of Chignik. Across the Aleutians, central and eastern chain will see the lightest winds at 15 to 25 knots. It'll be the west and west central areas looking at 30 to 35 knots with 5 to as high as 9-foot seas there across the western chain around Attu and west of Kiska. By Saturday, that comes up to 40 knots, so gales certainly possible into the central Aleutian chain as well, 35 to 40 knot winds there with 13-foot seas developing north of Adak, Atka, and west of Nikolsky. A southeasterly flow from the Pacific side, 30 to as high as 40 knots with 17-foot seas south of Adak and Atka on Saturday. Across the west coast, a 15 to 20 knot wind is expected. The highest winds there outside of Kuskokwim Bay with a 4-foot sea. Also looking for 4-foot seas around the Pribilofs. As you get into Saturday, a northeasterly wind still going around St. Lawrence Island, 6-foot seas around St. Matthew Island waters with winds from the east at 25. About the same there for the Pribilofs with a 5-foot sea, and northerlies out of Kuskokwim Bay still at around 15 knots. Northwesterly winds continue across the Beaufort Seacoast. The wind should be diminishing from this point onward, 10 to 20 knots there, 3 to 8-foot seas, the highest around Kaktovik with an offshore wind from Wainwright all the way down to Kotzebue Sound with a northeast wind at 15 knots. For Saturday, very light winds north of Kaktovik, but watch out for those seas still running around 8 feet. Southerlies coming out of Barrow and off of Point Lay and from Point Hope around 15 knots there at their highest, and northerlies inside of Kotzebue Sound with a 1-foot sea by Saturday. Recapping tonight's weather, we're still watching a frontal boundary work out of the northeastern sections of Alaska. With that, some higher winds and some snow showers. That should be diminishing. The next wave of weather working into southern Alaska has already brought rain to south central and southwestern Alaska and will be moving into northern sections of southeast. A stronger storm across the North Pacific will be making its way eastward as we head into the weekend, with gales expected there in the chain. Thanks for watching Alaska Weather.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
If you served in the military, the Alaska VA welcomes you home and thanks you for your service. You may be eligible for VA health care benefits, including reimbursement for your care at 26 tribal health facilities and their more than 180 outlying clinics throughout the state of Alaska. Apply online in less than 5 minutes.